The thing that wins my heart over is watching a dog find the birds and point, which is really my favorite kind of hunting is shortgrass prairie. Just got the sea of grass with nothing out there, sharp-tailed grouse, God knows where they are. Dog is running around and all of a sudden, boom, dog's on point. And I like watching the independence of the pointing dogs work. I mean, all of that is what attracts me to it. Pulling the trigger and shooting a bird is icing on the cake. Or one of the great things to improve your training is know, like, where is your fault? You know, are you too hard on the dog? Are you too impatient? Are you too easy on the dog? You know, do you rush things too much? Do you repeat things too much? If you fall in any one of those categories, there's going to be errors made. One of the cool things about the West method, it's obedience, but it's not obedience in that sense where I'm going to make you do something because I said so. You set situations up so the dog thinks he's teaching himself. So it's more methodical and smaller by smaller little pieces, and then you put the pieces together, and sometimes things happen like it's magic.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of GDIY presented by Standing Stone Supply. My guest this week is Ken McKean. Ken, how we doing?
Doing great.
So we are here. We're going to talk Griffs and breed clubs and West method, and we're going to cover a whole lot of fun ground. But Ken, go ahead and let's start off and introduce yourself.
Well, I currently live in Evanston, Illinois, and I've spent most of my adult life in Chicago, but for 15 years I lived in Idaho on and off, 10 years full time. One day we were renting a house in Idaho. We were summer vacation, and my wife, we were having some people over for drinks, and my wife put out some smoked salmon on a picnic table, and she came out, and there was this brown dog whose tail was thumping on the ground. It had little pink specks in his beard, and it was my first Griff, or Griffador actually, half Griff, half Lab. And Daisy was a great dog. She was just a great family dog. She was a good hunting dog, and she was my neighbor's, but they just had kids, and Daisy was 6 years old, and she said the neighbors always looked at her. She goes, I've got options. I can go over to Ken's house. So we sort of dual owned her, and I liked Griffs. I mean, she was such a wonderful dog, and I've known lots of Labs in my life. But first Griff I'd ever met. So I'm like, okay, Griff is for me. And when Daisy passed, I got another one, and then I've got another one and another one and another one. So, and in Idaho, they're as common as rocks.
Yeah.
They're perfect. The climate's perfect for them out there. Sort of like, there's Bob Ferris sort of brought poodle pointers in Idaho. Same idea. Good cold weather dogs, great waterfowl dogs, and good upland dogs. That's how I got into Griffs.
So tell me a little bit more about your just chance greeting from the neighbor dog in the backyard. Obviously, enjoyed a nice little salmon dinner on his part or her part.
Right.
Kind of walk me through the progression. Surely, were you a hunter before Daisy showed up, and Daisy just picked the right salmon to pick off? I mean, walk me through how this kind of progressed into hunting Griffs.
I grew up, my father was an avid hunter. He was much older when I was born, but our whole family's has been, into hunting. We had a golden retriever when I was a kid who was this was in the 60s, not a typical golden retriever. It was like a field champion, a great duck dog, and a good upland dog, I guess. I went squirrel rabbit hunting with it a couple times and shot rabbits with it when I was 10. I did some bird hunting when I moved to Chicago for work when I got out of college. Did some bird hunting without dogs. Looked into getting dogs, but, the city, life, none of that stuff, just got out of dogs or never got one. Moved to Idaho and did some hunting out there, not a ton, but just some. I knew about it. It wasn't like I wasn't tapped into it. It was just something that I hadn't visited for a while. Daisy's owner and I would go out and bird hunt when the season started, 2 or 3 times a week. Because as I've spoken with you before, birds were a 5-minute drive away from where we lived.
Right.
So it was easy just to, Oh, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Grab your shotgun and let's go see if we can't scare up some, mostly spruce grouse was the easiest access bird. And did some duck hunting with her, and that was it. And then when Daisy died, we got another dog, Jacques, who was a rescue. I got him from somebody down valley who got a Griff because he wanted a bird dog and just never liked them. So I got Jacques. We had moved a little bit out of town from where I met Daisy. There, bird hunting was in my backyard, literally. So, I mean, we had resident grouse in our spruce trees in the wintertime.
Man, that must be nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was unbelievable. There were, elk in the background, bobcats and cougars coming through the backyard. And I lived 5 miles outside of town. It wasn't like I lived in the middle of nowhere, but my backyard backed up to BLM land that went on for 200 or 300 miles. So,
Man, you must have had a really good can't miss job opportunity to take you from that all the way to Illinois.
I had a happy wife, happy life thing.
She said that you were happy long enough. Now I want to go back to the Midwest.
Small town living wasn't for her.
Well, and I don't want to harp on the first dog too much. That's we obviously have some ground to cover here, but I'm intrigued because obviously a mixed breed that can kind of go a number of different ways. The pointing instinct might overshadow the flushing dog or the retriever side. So just kind of walk me through how the dog was characteristic wise, in the field. What was the pointing there? Was it more of a flushing dog? Is this kind of where you found the West method?
I mean, she wasn't formally trained in any sense. She did point and she did flush. But she pointed and flushed. She was she didn't run very big. She was like a 35, 50-yard dog, but she knew her job. She'd find birds where we didn't see them. She'd point them. And when you got within 5 or 10 yards of her, she was like, all of a sudden she'd get a little competitive and go, I want to get that bird. And the bird would flush, shoot the bird, she'd retrieve the bird. And then my other dog was the same. It wasn't like bird hunting was just something you did where I was. It wasn't like I hunted deer and elk. I skied. I mountain biked. It was just out, it was just stuff you did outdoors. It wasn't like the prime focus of my life. It was just something that, okay, from September 1st till the snow got too deep, when I took my dog for a walk, I had a shotgun. That was really what it was. I mean, we go and walk out the backyard. Maybe we go walk for an hour and a half, and we sort of knew where the birds were, and that's what we did.
So it was really just more opportunistic outdoor activity overall, just
exactly.
General.
I've always loved dogs. And I had dogs all my life growing up, except for that 25-year period living in downtown Chicago and working, having a career, and it just didn't have dogs then because it just didn't have time with kids and all that sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
So, and I hunted here when I lived in Chicago. We'd go pheasant hunting. A bunch of guys would go, but it was in Iowa. We'd go pheasant hunting, or I had a friend who lived downstate, and we'd shoot doves down there. But the pheasant hunting would be there'd be 5 guys, and you get 2 at one end of the field and 3 at the other end blocking, and you'd walk, and birds would come up, and you'd shoot them or not shoot them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it wasn't really, I wasn't an avid hunter, or like now I consider myself a pretty avid hunter.
I was just about to say, so kind of hit the fast forward button and tell me when and why did all of a sudden you became hooked and all of a sudden you're really into the bird dogs and the bird hunting?
Well, when we moved back to Chicago in 2010, Jacques, my second Griff, he got sick and died. And I'm like, well, I guess that's it. I live in the suburbs. I don't live in the city. And my wife found Cooper, who's still with us. He's sleeping in the back room. He's almost 15. She found him on Pet Finder. And I went to Iowa and got him. I think he was about a year old when I brought him home. And she just said, you need a dog. Because when I had the dogs, they were with me all the time, 24/7. And she's like, you need a dog. So she found the dog. I went and got it. And when I got home, Cooper was a driven dog. And I didn't really have, like, I didn't know. I mean, I knew there was grouse hunting, sort of, and I knew there was pheasants in Iowa, sort of. And he was, because he was a year and he was kind of unruly. I mean, he just, the story I got from him was some kid in college in Iowa wanted a bird dog when he graduated, and he didn't realize that having a puppy is a full time job. He was out bird dogging himself, I think, and he came home one too many times at 3 o'clock in the morning, and his apartment was destroyed. He got rid of Cooper, and
Amazing what a kennel would have accomplished for him.
I mean, that's just, I don't know. That's his fact. That's the story.
Yeah.
I I went to a NAVDA chapter, a NAVDA thing, completely. I mean, I didn't know anything about bird dog training, really. I mean, I just knew, all the dogs I had was, you just sort of went out and they did their job because it was in their DNA. And I went to a local NAVDA chapter, and they sort of did some stuff, and I looked into training, and I went through. I remember one time hooking up this in a park near where I live, hooking up this elaborate low post thing, pulleys, and it was a disaster. And Cooper's like, "What the hell are you doing to me?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And the NAVDA was pretty was it was good, but one of the things I noticed when I went is, I mean, everybody liked their dogs or loved their dogs, but it seemed like they spent a lot of time yelling at their dogs. Like, just everything was a yelling, like it wasn't here, it was like here, or, whoa. It was just, I was like, well, I don't really like yelling at my dog. And I'm sort of a pathologically anti-authoritarian person anyway. And so I don't like telling my dog what to do. I mean, in that sort of way, like, issuing orders. I met a guy, there was a couple of Griffs in Chicago, and I went to and I guess Facebook had just started. I guess maybe I was on it, but anyway, there was a Griff gathering in Michigan, and I went and I met this guy, Michael Shippa, who is he was one of the guys that started the hunting wire-haired page on Facebook, and he's a breeder, and he's been into bird dogs since his whole life. And I was like, what's going on? And he sent me an article that was, I think, that Martha Greenlee had written. It was like a printed article in some magazine.
The thermostat article, maybe?
What?
Are you getting to the thermostat article? Is that what it is?
No, it wasn't that. It was just some, it was some bird dog training thing. But this was before they were on Facebook, and there was a blog. And it just sort of made sense to me. It just, like, the way they did it. Not that I had any idea what I was doing, but just it seemed to me to make more sense than like, intimidate, like teaching your dog through intimidation, or at least that's sort of what I saw what was going on. Or, it just made sense to me more than the other stuff made sense. One thing led to another, and I became, and I went down that rabbit hole and just became, and really got hooked on training. I mean, I like to train dogs more than I like to hunt dogs, or more than I like to shoot birds. I love to hunt dogs, but, like, when I hunt, I'm training. Like, if my dog doesn't perform or doesn't do what I want it to do, it's, shooting birds is secondary, is what I should say.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of people, when they go out and hunt, the training goes out the window, and they're just out to shoot birds.
Yeah.
And, as you say, chicken's cheap.
Well, and it's somebody hearing this that maybe they're brand new to bird hunting, so maybe they're still in that stage to where it's just like, we need birds. I want to shoot birds. I want to shoot birds. But even people that have been in this world for a while, they kind of struggle to understand what you're saying, to where some people just prioritize, or emphasize, maybe the right word, the dog work more so than the success of the hunting. Because I've hunted with plenty of people on both sides, and I'm not going to say one is better than the other. Whatever floats your boat. If it's safe, legal, and fun, have at it. But I can empathize and understand with what you're saying, because I mean there have been times to where it's like, I've had successful hunts with mediocre dog work that kind of just falls flat in my head. And then I've had mediocre hunts that just kind of have the highlights from the dogs that just, I think back on it now, and those hunts just meant exponentially more. So it seems like every year I'm turning more and more into that. It doesn't matter if I find success on the hunt, as long as the dog work meets the level that I'm after. And it's hard for some people to really understand and grasp that if the dog work just isn't a priority of theirs.
I have a theory that people who have pointing dogs or hunt because they like dog work, and people who have flushing dogs like to kill birds. I mean, I'm not saying, but I'm just saying because, the thing that captures or wins my heart over is watching a dog work, be a predator and then find the birds and point them.
Mm-hmm.
And which is really like, to skip ahead, my favorite kind of hunting is like shortgrass prairie, where you've just got the sea of grass with nothing out there. You really, I mean, maybe there's some objectives you hunt for certain birds, but like sharp-tailed grouse, God knows where they are. You kind of know where they are, but God knows where they are.
Yeah, get to walking.
You got this big pallet, this big canvas, the dog is running around, and all of a sudden, boom, dog's on point. And I just like watching dogs work. And I like watching the independence of the pointing dogs work. I mean, all of that is what attracts me to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so pulling the trigger and shooting a bird is icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And of course, my friends will tell you the reason I don't really care about shooting by birds because I can't shoot for crap. But that's really not it. It's just I just like watching dogs work.
And you're not the first person to kind of have that theory on the pointing dog. The dog work being more important for the pointer owners, at least on average, maybe more so than the flushing dog owners. I'm reminded of my buddy Scott, who's kept his hunting journals for decades and lifelong hunter, and he randomly called me like this past summer, and he's like, man, I've been going over all the data, and it seems like I kill more birds with the flushing dog. And there's a million theories and guesses as to why that might be, but all in all, I would say that I would agree with the majority of that kind of theory. Is just the flushing dog guys, like, they're just getting after it. There's really not an opportunity for the quote unquote dog work to screw the hunt up, because at the end of the day, most of the time when the dog work goes south, it's the bird is flying too soon. It's flushing too soon, and you don't get a play on it. Well, in a flushing dog, it's kind of like, I mean, unless you're really requiring some high level flushing dog work and steadiness after the flush and stuff like that, odds are, if it busts a bird, that's kind of what you're after anyway.
Right. It's what it's supposed to do. And,
right.
Hopefully you've been fleet of foot enough to keep up with it.
Right.
The dog's trained enough to, only work so far in front of it.
You got hooked on the dog training. Like you said, once it connected. And so kind of walk me through the journey of, surely you didn't get hooked and just started training based off of that one article that Martha wrote. Kind of guide me through the rest of the journey. Where did you start picking information? Did you start going to seminars? Where did you start really diving full on into the West method?
Well, there was right when that sort of happened, there was a blog, a Steady with Style blog that was Mo Lindley and the usual cast of characters. And then at some point, right after I got into it, the blog went to there was the Facebook page. There's a Steady with Style Facebook page. And there was a lot of information there. Everybody is extremely helpful on there. So if you got a problem, and there's a lot of experienced trainers on, I mean, you don't know they're experienced trainers, but now that I've been around them, there's there's a fair amount of pro trainers that are on that page.
Yeah.
I sort of read like what you're supposed to do, which is I got a pinch collar and I got a check cord. And I eventually, pretty soon after that, I bought some launchers, and I live in Chicago. So I became an avid pigeon trapper. I would trap pigeons. It's kind of hard to know how it worked out and how I became, because I think now I'm a pretty good trainer. Just through experience and really thinking about it. Like it's something I focused on. I thought about it. Like, what am I doing wrong? What could I do better? And I did I've been to a seminar. I went to I had another dog that was the best dog I've ever owned by a mile. But man, I could not get him to be steady. He just, I mean, it took forever to get him to point, and he was just a predator. And I went down and saw, I did posted something on Facebook. I'm having trouble, and Dave Jonesy, was a Mo Lindley was his mentor, and he lives down in Kentucky. And he's like, "Man, bring your dog down here. Let's spend the weekend with him." Jonesy, he got the dog steady in the weekend only because part of the thing that happens, and it's a misconception of the West method, is they think it's all rainbows and unicorns. Because there's no yelling, there's no picking the dog up and shaking it. There's none of the stuff that you see a lot of people do they think there's no correction. It's kind of like, I don't know what it is, like a Montessori school or something. And it's not. There's corrections are made. They're usually made with the e-collar. As Jonesy said, he made Cider ride lightning. And boy, he was like, okay, I guess I can't get away with that anymore. And he said, you had the dog there. The dog would accept the correction because the dog understood what it was supposed to do, which I didn't understand that's where it was. I was afraid to be too heavy with the e-collar because you hear all the horror stories about being too heavy with the e-collar. And he's like, no, this dog knows he just needed to be told, knock it off. And it worked. I mean, and then he became a prized utility test. I ran him in the highest test in the versatile
the invitational
or whatever. He got, he and Cooper both are in the top 10 highest scoring dogs ever for their PE test, which is it's kind of like the invitational levels test. Brace work, longer times, blind retrieves, all that stuff. And he was a great bird. But he was another rescue I got. He spent the first 6 months of his owner died when he was a puppy, and he spent 3 or 4 months feral, hunting to feed himself. So he was a apex predator.
So getting him to really have that pointing instinct and that cooperation really was tough getting through it. It's interesting that, obviously the unique situation in him kind of living on his own and being feral earlier on in his development, that's kind of unique in of itself. But what you described with Jones, for anybody that's been training dogs for any length of time, that's really not all that unfamiliar. We've all kind of been in a situation to where you can't really see the forest through the trees.
Right.
It's like sometimes you just need somebody else to show you, or just to kind of turn that light bulb on, because you're in that situation. I've had numerous people come out here and train, and it's like, look, like your dog is ready. You've done the work. You have the foundation in them. You just kind of have to take that next step and trust the process. Like you have to kind of surrender to it, to where, I'm curious, like, so was he offering up that steadiness on the pinch collar and the check cord? And then when you switch to the e-collar, essentially that's when it went out the window for you?
Yeah. I mean, that's, as Jonesy calls it, and then the West method, you run your dogs all with the check cord forever. As Jonesy explains it, he goes, when you take the check cord off, that's like, in the dog's mind, that's changing the rules. So he's going to say, what can I get away with now? Like, oh, it's different now.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens if you train your dog in one field and then you go to another field. It's like, well, maybe the rules don't apply here. They're always going to kind of push you to see what they can get away with. And so when you took the check cord off, it was just that he could get away with it. And these were also on loose birds. This wasn't in pigeons and launchers anymore. These were on loose quail running around in the woods.
So probably adding a little visual to it as well.
But he was like, and that, seeing a bird move, all of that stuff just got him amped. Mm-hmm. And another thing is I've learned as a trainer, one of the great things to improve your training is kind of like, where is your fault? Are you too hard on the dog? Are you too impatient? Are you too easy on the dog? Do you rush things too much? Do you repeat things too much? All of those, if you fall in any one of those categories, there's going to be errors made.
Yeah. The key words you just used in all.
I myself as a person who's gives the dog the benefit of the doubt a little too often, and maybe doesn't progress as fast as I should have.
Yeah.
I mean, I've improved, I think, but that's, you know, if you kind of can identify like where are your flaws as a trainer, then you can always watch yourself and go, you know what I'm doing? I'm doing it again,
Yeah.
and, stop it.
And it's interesting, in every single one of those examples you just listed out, the key words in those were too much of anything.
Right.
The key thing that we're after is balance. I mean, I'm sorry. So sometimes you just got to get in a dog's butt. Sometimes you got to give them a little bit more free range to, give them a little leeway to make the mistakes and stuff like that. So, I mean, just balance is a thing. And anybody listening to this is kind of just hit on the West method in general is, it was Mo Lindley, Wes Gibbons. There's a number of influencers in this. You're essentially teaching that the bird means stop. The bird means whoa. So you're not really using whoa in the sense that the vast majority of other methods are using it. And so you start that off with a pinch collar, hooked up to a check cord, then you're going to overlay an e-collar on that, and it's a natural progression overlay all the way through it. If you want more information on that, then by all means find the Training with Mo book. I am coming to appreciate the West method as one of my preferred ways of looking at anything inside the field department of what we like to do. Is to what you're saying, Ken, is it's very, I don't know, it's like black and white. It's fair to the dog, I guess, is the easiest way that I like to look at it. Is to your point, so many people are quick to just grab the e-collar, go out in the field, fly a bird, yell whoa, and hit the e-collar. Well, a lot of people kind of miss all of that learning and the education before that, or at least they don't do it enough. And to your point, Ken, is you can train these behaviors, and these dogs can learn the behaviors in a field or certain environment. The second you go into another place, or you add a component to it or take away a component, such as the check cord that you're describing, then you're kind of starting all the way over in that individual step. And so we talk about generalizing the behavior as teach it in the short grass or a small field, but then, eventually you got to leave that field in short grass and you got to go into new areas and you got to do it on new birds and in new surroundings, and just kind of generalize the behavior and the lesson overall. And that's where a lot of people struggle, especially if you have only access to one training field, is they'll train it, they'll get it up to par, and they'll really hammer it and get some really good, nice looking dog work, and then they'll go test on unfamiliar grounds, and because they didn't generalize that behavior, guess who all of a sudden's ripping birds, and then you have the owner scratching his head saying, well, this never happens.
Yeah, never done that before. One of the cool things about the West method is, and the thing I think that people don't understand about it or are confused by it or turns them off, is the chain of command to the human observer doesn't make sense, right? It's not like I'm issuing orders, you follow the orders, right? It's obedience, but it's not obedience in that sense where I'm going to make you do something because I said something. It's more, you set situations up so the dog thinks he's teaching himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing that people like about it, like the steady with style, the reason it has that is, you look at a lot of dogs that go through more traditional methods or more old school methods. The dogs, there's a little shine is taken off of them. It's like, okay, if you start out with a 9-month-old puppy or a 15-month-old puppy or whenever the dog's ready for formal training, and all of a sudden you kind of whittle some of that spirit out of them, you break them. I mean, it's called dog breaking. If you do the West method properly, all of that spirit's still in them, because I think one of the episodes you had with the guys that had the method, which I thought was sort of funny because the West people refer to the West method as the method when we're together. But they talked about the dog becoming resentful. And that really stuck with me. And I think that's what happens. It's like the dog's like, because they don't really understand, they're not people. And if you can trick the dog into thinking that it's teaching itself, I think of it as like leveraging the dog's natural instincts to teach itself.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a martial arts, right? If you're how can a 98-pound woman flip a 200-pound man over because she uses proper leverage and pressure in a way that's not obvious to the eye? That's sort
Yeah.
of the analogy that makes it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what we're describing, and I think Martha and I even spoke about this when I did the episode with her last year, is essentially the method, the West method, is free shaping overall in the field, because the learned behaviors are much more impactful for a dog if they think they figured it out on their own. I mean, it's the same thing with us when we figure things out on our own as opposed to somebody just telling us or teaching us. If we can kind of make the connections on our own, and that is the entire purpose of the West method is, for instance, we set up the scenarios and the training process. Like, what we will actually go out there and you plan it based on the wind. Do you want the wind? Do you not want the wind? If you're doing stop to flush, like, there's a couple different scenarios, but ultimately you're not there to control it. You're just kind of there to guide or even steer to make sure that it goes according to plan. And so when the dog establishes point, well, as soon as they take a step, they move, they do something, then that bird launches, and that dog thinks, "Oh, I made that bird fly." Right. And instead of somebody woeing the dog into a point, or the dog just going on point, and even when they don't move, people are horrible about saying whoa unnecessarily, no matter what. Like, it's kind of like woes. The definition of whoa is to stop. So I don't understand, when the dog is stopped and on point, why people continue to use whoa, right? It's, I would understand it more if the dog takes a step, then yes, whoa, it comes into play. But essentially, that's why I say, like, we're not training whoa or using whoa in the sense that the majority of methods out there do it. We're training it, we're just not naming it, and the vast majority of the people in the West method don't use it that way, right?
Right. And it's also, as you pointed out, it's more about the dog learning, not that the dog isn't learning to respect you, but his behavior becomes because he respects birds, not because you've given him a command to do something. So it's another, very rarely do you use birds that are asleep in a field. And I mean, you don't make it easy for a dog, because, I've seen people and they're like, "Oh, my dog, like, why is my dog point right on top of this bird?" Well, your dog's a predator, right? He's going to get as close to the bird as he can.
Yeah.
If he, to be a good predator, that's what he wants to do. If a bird's asleep and he can he knows the bird's not going to go anywhere, most dogs will go, "You can just sit in the cab of the truck if you want. I'll clean this field up for you."
Yeah.
And be back in a jiffy. So, I mean, that's part of the trying to make it as natural as possible, or something, I don't know, in that order.
Yeah, and since I've kind of been dabbling in the West method, and I've obviously done a number of episodes kind of featuring it, and then people come over and we kind of train together. It's really interesting kind of getting outside. They haven't had any experience with the West method, people's perspectives on the method, because there's a couple of elements built within the method that, like, I don't know if uneasy is the word, but like, people just, there's a hurdle for them to kind of get over and understand. First of which, you got the check cord. There's been so many people, and they've come on this podcast and a number of different methods that say that, the best thing that you can do with a 20-foot check cord is to cut it up into 5-foot sections, and you got 4 or 5-foot leashes. All right. And so, given whichever method that you're using, the check cord may not apply to it. But then outside of the check cord, then you get the pinch collar. And the pinch collar, if you really don't understand the pinch collar, it can, to a person that doesn't understand or they're unfamiliar with it, it can really kind of not sit well with somebody until they really fully understand and hold one in their hand and see that you can even put a balloon in most of these pinch collars and it's not even going to pop the balloon. Like, it's just, I think it's one of the name situations. Then we go into the fact of what I already talked about. Whoa, like, people, they cannot grasp or get around the fact, like, your dog doesn't know whoa, how do they know how to point? And then, once you get into the method, it's a lot of one step forward, one step back, one step forward, one step back. Up, we just took 3 steps forward, right? And so you really kind of have to surrender to the method for it to make sense. Is I equate it, it's very similar to me in force fetch in the fact that everything builds off of each other. And so if you really step back, you understand the method overall from high up, you can kind of see all the individual steps and it makes a lot more sense. But if you're just looking at it like we're all kind of prone to do, especially early on, and you're like, okay, like put a check cord and a pinch collar on it, you know, it can make it can cause concern for some people. And then let's face it, there are some sections within the training, it's just ugly. It's just ugly training when you get a dog that, you know, the check cord, you know, they're going to get sucked into you when you're doing stop to flush. When they're around bird scent as opposed to in bird scent, all of a sudden they're going to start thinking birds are popping up everywhere. And so that dog is going to get sucked in anticipating these flushes. And then that's when, you know, you have to take a step back and understand it's balance again. So if they get sucked in, maybe we have to stop this. Let's go shoot a few birds for them and extend it out. Again, Martha and Mo break this out in the book much better than what I did, but I'm just trying to like simplify the whole method in general for those listening that maybe they've never heard of the West method, or maybe they have kind of preconceived notions from somebody else, because there's so many elements that kind of go in the face of so many other training methods that we learned, whether it's through NAVDA or just if you Google it, you're going to get a million different methods. And that's why it's like you really do need to kind of study it and understand this step goes into the next one. And if you don't understand what that next one is, it's hard to understand what your current step is accomplishing.
Well, and just to emphasize that point, and one of the things I've learned that's made me a better trainer is you take small bites, and the patience, like a typical training day, like a typical, you get a bunch of guys together and going to train. And we've all been there. If you've trained, you know, if you've been around people who train dogs, they've got their bag of birds, you know, usually 3, never 2, never 4, but usually
always 3, maybe 5, sometimes 5.
Maybe 5. You go and you put them out in the field, right? And this could be with a dog that's 8 months old. You know, you put the check cord on them. Maybe if they're too wild, you put the half hitch around their belly, and you take them out, and then you bring them into the bird, and if they smell it, if they don't smell it, you keep bringing them around. You know, then you tell them to whoa, but they might not even know what whoa means, but you tell them to whoa. You know, if they don't do it, you do something to them to make them stand still or do whatever, which is you pick them up, set them back, shake them, yell at them. Regardless of what's happened up until that point, somebody goes in and flushes the bird, and you shoot the bird, and you send the dog for the retrieve. Well, that's especially for a dog that's never done anything before, or even for a dog that's in the middle of trying to learn that's a lot of stuff going on. And in the West method, the first thing you do is you teach your dog to stand still, right? Whoa, essentially. But stand still with no birds. Once he stands still, can you walk around the dog? You know, you do it at first in the back, and you get in front of the dog. Will the dog let you do it? If he doesn't do it, you give him the cue, which is the tug, to stand still. And then all of this is done supposedly calmly, right? You want to be calm. So that's a whole thing. It's like you don't say anything and you don't get excited. And if the dog does what you want, you give it like gentle strokes. You don't give it a bunch of attaboys or whatever to get it excited. Because as Mo says, a dog can't learn that's not calm. And it's just you progress. So you may not shoot a bird for a dog forever. I mean, or for months. You may not, if the dog's not pointing, you may not bring it into point. Like you said, the stop the flush. I've got a lot of dogs to point where you walk them through a field and you're the birds are downwind from you, and you just start popping birds, and then you make the dog stand still when it pops birds. But the dog starts thinking, "Man, am I making these birds go?" Respecting birds, and all of a sudden you do that, and next thing you know, you're bringing in the dog points. But I had so many people, I think, that have a problem with it. They watch me train, and they go, "What are you doing? Like, you're not doing it." We had a friend that has kind of a wild poodle pointer, and I was bringing the dog out to, try to just to work it. And I just had it on a lead, the check cord for a while, and I was just walking the dog around. And they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, the dog's, his mind is, his eyes are rolled back in his head. I mean, he's just super amped. I mean, if he's not going to pay attention to me, then he's not going to be able to learn anything, right? So before you could do anything, you got to get the dog in the right attitude, the right mindset. So you don't just take the dog out of the truck and put on cord and then you march out in the field. You got to get the dog prepared. Like, are you sitting in your seat at the desk and ready to go? Or are you throwing paper airplanes and spitballs?
Are your pencil sharpened?
But I mean, are you ready to go?
Yeah.
So it's more methodical and smaller bites, smaller little pieces. And then you put the pieces together. And sometimes things happen like it's magic because the dog's thinking, the dog's thinking about this.
Yeah. It's almost like, again, I've only really messed with my setter pup Quinn on this. And so while we say that some things take a while within this method, what you just said is the magic is like when it happens fast. It happens quick to where it's just like you may do this one particular step for weeks or months, and it's just like snail pace, and then all of a sudden it's just like boom, one day it's just there, and it's just like you can sometimes just like the dog just goes from like not even establishing point to all of a sudden fully steady, right? And what the thing that I find fascinating is I appreciate things that like when you revisit them, you learn something every time, whether that's reading the book or you're actually putting your hands on the dog is the thing that stuck with me the most out of reading Training with Mo probably for the third time, because it's a very quick read, right? It doesn't take long to read through it. So every time you go through it, you're going to pick up something new. And I think one of the biggest distinguishing factors of the West method that, when I talk about this, even Martha was just like, oh, well, yeah, but like when you talk to other people and you bring this up and put it into words, it seems obvious, but it's so powerful in the fact that every other method, whether it's whoa, e-collar, whatever, you're correcting a dog for moving before the bird gets off the ground.
Right.
Right. In the West method, you never correct the dog while the bird is on the ground. The dog is never smelling a bird or in a scent cone or on point and getting corrected before that bird flies. So he is always getting corrected when the bird is in the air, and that means stop, whether that's the pinch collar or the e-collar or you name it, whoa, whatever. And to me, like that is one of the most profound things to whether you're a West method guy, you have don't have any desire to go this way, is pay attention when you're in the field how many people will have their dog establish point, and when they take a step, instead of that causing the bird to fly away, which would be a real wild bird scenario, they give it a correction, whether it's verbal or the e-collar or what have you. And in the West method, by you really paying attention, if you're doing it and approaching it the correct way, you're only ever correcting that dog after they cause that bird to fly away.
Right. And you couldn't say it any better. And it's interesting, I just listened to the episode with that guy up in New York that had the Griff puppy. I mean, it was like one of my favorite episodes. The fella, what's it called? The Switch coming on.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It just was out yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this is going to be out, but it was yesterday. And that guy, I was like, man, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
Right? The dog taught himself, right? He busted birds. Unfortunately, even though he shot the gun, he never shot a bird.
Right.
But I was thinking, even though he shot the gun, that's just sort of like gun breaking.
Yeah. Just firing them up. Yeah.
It's like, okay, when the bird goes, the gun goes. I associate gunfire with birds flying. And I mean, probably not what you want to do, but in the end, you can put a positive spin on it. And then all of a sudden, you can hunt him. He's a dog you can hunt with now. And nothing happened except you let the bird teach the dog.
And ultimately, that's what we're supposed to be doing in any method. And so, I encourage people, just next time you're in the field with people, start paying attention to how often these dogs get corrected while they're actually in bird scent, and what are we actually trying to teach the dog or have the dog understand? If not, if they break point, the bird gets away. They don't get the bird, right? Like, there's not a wild bird scenario, a real true wild bird scenario, that if that dog breaks in on them, that bird's just gonna wait there just because we, until we get involved in the picture. And so, like, once that really hit home with me, the entire method kind of made a lot more sense to me. And
Right.
but you read that book, for such a small book, there's so many little small details in there.
Amazing? Like,
Yeah.
I've read it 20 times, and every time you read it, it's like, wow,
Yeah.
there's something new in there.
Yeah, and just, again, if you're not even going to do the method, there's so much quality information built in there, and it's all field stuff. Don't buy this book thinking that it's going to walk you through, the versatile dog process and all that. Mo and them, they do force fetch like everybody else. They do all that, but in this book, it really is just the field steadiness portion, and it's not an obedience thing. So just kind of understand that you're getting into that. But if you're struggling, or you want just some more insight into quality, just theories when it comes to field work, I would say, from what I've experienced, you'd be hard pressed to find a bit better book than Training with Mo.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah. So, in your experience with your habitual rescuing of all these special head cases and special scenarios of your Griffs, I want to know your experience. You started training Wes Method. I know that you've mentioned that you've done trials and tests and found success with your Griffs on this. I want to hear a little bit more about your adventure into that, and then I need to hear why the Griff club that you started, the breed club.
Well, I didn't start it, but I got roped into being the treasurer.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. Well, Cooper, who was the dog I got, who was the dog that sort of brought me to NAVHDA. I couldn't test him in NAVHDA because I didn't have any papers on him. And they wouldn't even test him like as a, can I just run a trial test? Nope. So that's how and my friend Michael Shippa, who was one of my mentors, or is one of my mentors, he's associated with the Versatile Hunting Dog Federation, which is essentially, it's the same as NAVHDA.
It's very similar.
Better about it because it's instead of a 4-point system, it's a 10-point system or a 12-point system. So I tested Cooper in that. I tested Cider the same weekend. I tested him in that. In PE, which is it's like,
I think it's a performance evaluation or something like that.
Right. And it's an hour in the field with a brace mate. There's a track, like a track that's 400 yards long or something. So it's a longer track. And one of the things they do different versus NAVHDA is they don't have duck search. They have search behind the duck. So it's essentially tracking on the water, which I guess is how NAVHDA did it back in the day.
I was about to say, originally that was how NAVHDA did it, and then they switched over to the current duck search.
So there's that, and then in the performance evaluation, there's a search without a duck. It's just, we send your dog in the water, there's no bird out there, but we want to see, does the dog expand looking for game?
Right.
Where there, at least it's not set up where he's going to find game. That doesn't mean he won't find it, but he's going to set it up. And then there's a blind retrieve in water. I think that's about it. I think that's it. And it's fun. It's it's more small time. It's more like a fun hunt or something, fun test. It's not. It's a serious test, but it's just it's more like the judges are more easygoing. It's usually smaller. It's just more fun.
Well, there's no pedigree system, so you're not really earning a title. You're essentially just going. Ultimately, it's an evaluation, and just bragging rights for your case. You don't have papers. They'll do this for any breed. You can just go get a mutt from a rescue, and if there's hunting instinct in it, then you can go get graded on it if you would like.
And I tell people, nobody's taking my advice, but I tell people, like, if you're going to go to the Invitational, run them in the PE test.
Yeah, because that's a good idea.
If you say your dog got a 195 in the PE test, nobody knows what that means.
Right.
It's not like if the dog doesn't do well, and there really is no doing well, you just get a score.
Yeah.
There's a maximum score and there's a minimum score, but if your dog doesn't do what you want to do, it's still what'd you get? I got a 183. Okay, what does that mean? Yeah, I got a 183. So it's just a great like dry run, and it's essentially, especially for if you're, if your dog is used to brace work, it's a great system for that. I ran Cider in a utility test where he got a prize 3, which was surprising because the week before in a practice test he did well. That was trainer, too much, putting too much on it. He was just like, I'm sick and tired of this. And then I've got another dog, Ranger, who's 4 years old. Cider died when he was 6. He got blastocytosis, which is a fungal infection. Like 2 weeks after he died, a friend of mine who's a pro trainer in Illinois said, it was right in the middle of COVID, the summer of COVID. And he knew somebody who was a client who actually picked their dog up the day the world shut down, and they both lost their jobs. They their plans were gone. So I got Ranger, and I've tested him. He's done VDHF and utility. He did a utility test, but he wasn't steady to fall. But I still did it. I planned on doing it, but I said to myself, I'm not going to force this dog. I'm not going to put a Band-Aid on it and make him steady to fall just so I can run this test. So still, he got a prize 2. And then my buddy Michael Shippa, who's a Griff breeder, I just got a puppy from him this summer, not the 9-month-old, the one who ate the hand lotion this afternoon.
So whether it's salmon or hand lotion, it's just not safe in your house.
It's not. No. Griffs are also eaters.
Oh, okay. They're junkyard dogs.
Yeah. Well, that funny story about Cider, which some people know. When I got him, the people I got him from said, I think you should run this dog, NA test or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I got him. And I had him 2 or 3 weeks. He ran in the NA test. It was when they used quail. He found all 6. He was the first dog out. He found all 6 quail, never pointed any of them, ate all 6.
That'll teach him.
When he's like, I love this. It's like a now frying sign.
I'm having fun and I got lunch. All right.
He also ate the pheasant in the track, the whole thing.
Oh, wow. So you obviously, to your point, VHDF, you're not getting any titles or anything like that. Heck, you didn't even have papers on your dogs, on some of them, and obviously you're kind of doing the rescue deal with these Griffs. So you're genuinely just kind of doing this for the fun of it, for the journey, for the experience. It doesn't sound like you're really out there, trying to build a pedigree or even really shopping for the puppies from the general breeders that have that. You're kind of just getting these big question marks and trying to make bird dogs out of them.
Yeah, and I've been, they've all been pretty good dogs. Ranger, when I first got him, he was a bit of a. I know Griffs are supposedly close working dogs. I've never had a close working dog until I got Ranger, and he was a bootlicker. And I'm like, man, you can do a lot of things, but if you're bootlicking, you will not be long with me. I'll never forget the first time I took him grouse hunting, and he was like right by my side, or maybe even was even behind me, and I kicked up a grouse, and he chased it like 15 yards. Didn't even chase it that hard. And he came back, he goes, that's cool, do that again.
Good, cool trick, Dad.
I was like, man, you don't know how close you are to being gone. And I was out in Oklahoma quail hunting, and literally the switch went off. It was like we were out there all week. He wasn't doing anything. And then he found us. I didn't even see it. A friend of mine saw it. He found a single somewhere, and that bird flushed, and it flew. I think it was kind of low, and he just ripped after that bird. And my buddy Eric's like, yeah, no, Ranger, go. And then he's like, whoa, Ranger, whoa, because there was a road cut. And he flew off this thing. It was like a 15-foot drop because chasing this quail. And all of a sudden, he comes out the other side, 15 feet up. Like after that, it was like, okay, game on with Ranger. Now, he's a very good dog.
What's his range like now? Ballpark it.
If he's hunting with other dogs, he gets sort of intimidated by other dogs, or he's like likes to see what they're doing. If he's hunting with other dogs, it's like 50, 75 yards. If he's hunting with me, it's 100 to 200 just by himself, that's for me, that's a minimum.
Right.
If you're not out 100 yards, then I'm just going to go buy a Springer Spaniel. So
Well, and I mean that's a great example of the light switch being flipped because range. It's one of those. I've had people ask me. I've had buddies that I've been out in the field, and they're concerned about their dogs being underfoot. And I always say, it's not that difficult early on. If you have an 8-year-old dog that's just used to being within 20 yards of you, it's going to be pretty difficult. But if you have a young dog and hadn't really been exposed to true wild birds, don't get too impatient. It's hard to get. You can get frustrated on that. I've been there. I know my buddies have been there, but just keep going, and birds will make them pull out. Now, I'm not going to say that the dog that's naturally underfoot and all of a sudden you get into birds, you're not going to have that 400 or 500 yard horizon stretching English pointer. But those birds, once it clicks and they realize there are birds out there and my job is to go find it, they will extend. But it is hard not to get frustrated in the moment to when you're hunting and your dog is, forget even 20 yards out in front of you. It's just they're essentially walking at heel with you. It can be pretty frustrating.
Terrible. And another thing I do, which a lot of people think is crazy, like I don't like the fun walks. I don't say anything to my dogs. I don't call. I mean, I do puppies. I teach recall. That's pretty much all I do. Heel is the last thing I teach my dog because I don't want my dog at heel. I want my dog in front of me.
Yeah.
There was a trainer that did a good idea, gave me a good trick. Was so you take a young puppy, a 12-week-old puppy or 10-week-old puppy, you take it out in the field and you just make sure you're behind that dog all the time, even if he's walking circles. Just get so the dogs, if he looks back, he just knows that his place is in front of you. And then when they get a little older and they expand out, when they start hunting a little bit, like they've had bird intro and they're just more curious. When they turn, I make a noise. I go a little clicking noise. So every time they turn, I make that noise and then I turn with them. And now if I'm out going and I go, they just know to look for me and turn. So I don't do the stuff that a lot of people do, like heeling and walking. I mean, you want them to walk on a lead without pulling you, but just to do stuff that your job is to be in front of me and to be looking for things, not to be concerned about like, what's dad doing? Am I supposed to be next to you? I don't train any of that stuff until much later.
Yeah.
Especially, Griffs are like, they take everything to heart, I think. And they're like, okay, I guess the default place, nobody seems to be yelling at me when I'm right by.
Well, and I mean, there's so much good information to unpack in there is, one, I would agree the fun runs in general don't get utilized enough. People will go exercise their dog. They'll go in the backyard and train, but like, I'm a huge component of fun runs, and I'm with you. Right before we hit record on this, I went and did my fun run with the dogs because they need to burn some energy before I even go try and do a training session with them. Because again, getting them in that mindset to learn or work with you, even if it's just an obedience lesson. But you're right. If the dog goes off to your left or right or behind you, just stop. Wait for the dog to get back in front of you before you carry on. I don't even like calling them back to me because I don't want them to rely on me to call them back to get back into the hunt, if that makes sense. That's the way I look at it. And then I get asked all the time, okay, I got this puppy. What do I do with it now? Am I force fetching it tomorrow? It's something like that. But what I tell them is the obedience. Don't be in a huge rush in obedience with a young dog. I mean, we want to be encouraging and shaping and creating the boundaries and stuff. But when it gets time to start training the obedience, what I like to encourage people is to balance the action. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to do something, let's call it crate training is usually what we start off with. That is an action that you're sending the dog away from them. Then the next one, have it come back to you, do recall. Then the next one, do place training, have it sit there. Then the next one, heel, like it brings it back into you. Then out, don't just don't do recall into heel into whoa, because then you're going to end up with a dog that's naturally sticky with you, and then you got to range it out. Just balance out the actions. If one action is going to be going away from you, the next one's coming to you, and vice versa.
I mean, I just don't really do much obedience training. I mean, except here, was it Rick Smith? You want your dog to come to you, go with you, and stand still.
Yeah.
Well, even my fun runs, I would just, if I was going to have birds, like with Hector, my little puppy, I would go and I'd buy some birds. I bought 30 or 40 quail, and I have a place where I can keep them. Like the day, on a Thursday afternoon, I go to my training ground and I'd release 8 or 10 quail. And then I sort of knew where I released them, but I just take the dog out, and he would find birds or didn't find birds. But when he did find them, they acted like they were a little wild. Mm-hmm. They weren't, and there wasn't my foot scent, there wasn't my hand scent, they were birds just out there.
Yep. That happened on my fun run today too.
Yeah, I saw a couple of days ago, you said, "Oh, you found a training bird somewhere."
Yeah.
That's how all I do is train on roughed over training birds.
Yeah.
I very rarely put birds out. And I mean, unless you're doing like pigeons and launchers, you're really doing that formal training. But once you get to the loose bird stuff, if I do put birds out, I'll put them out, just throw them. I mean, just let them fly away, and then I'll do something go swim or something, then come back.
Yep.
But I very rarely ever put a bird down in the ground.
I love having these little leftover quail just hanging out. Now these kind of silly dumb quail just seem to hold up like closer to the house for whatever reason. They have an entire field and they could go anywhere that they want, but of course they hang out by the house and the tree line. And so every time I'm trying to come in and get the dogs put back up, then of course one of them finds them, and it's just like, all right, birds. But yeah, I mean, it's like they've been pen raised birds. They've been sitting in the Johnny house they were in there for a while, and then I just, before hunting season, I hit the road, I just let them go. And I mean, there's a handful of them that just, they're around. And very often on my fun runs, I don't even have an e-collar on my dogs. And, it seems like every time we go out, we're bumping into at least one of them, and we're getting those lessons. And I don't have to worry about it. I don't worry about my dogs catching them and all that. They haven't yet. And, it's good quality lessons that the bird is teaching them. And, it's not a true wild quail by any means, but, as long as it's flying healthy, it's healthy enough to fly, and my dogs can't catch it, and I don't have any foot scent or hand scent around that bird, it's a valuable opportunity for me. I
agree. I mean, I think that's great. I think it's, even though the contacts may not be as much, I think it's quality over quantity.
Oh yeah, and it adds an element of fun to the fun run. The dogs love those runs. They're hunting harder on those fun runs, and I've taken some buddies' dogs out on these little runs, and that they don't really know how to act. It's just, they pick up every time they've been off leash in the woods. As Dad's had a vest and a shotgun in hand, and they just they're kind of confused for a bit. But my dogs, whether I'm carrying a shotgun or not, like they're hunting. They're trying to find whatever's out there, and we'll stumble across a woodcock. We'll stumble across one of these quails, whatever. So I do need to hear about this Griff Club, especially with we already talked about you're essentially bringing in all these question marks within the household. Talk to me about the breed club and the purpose behind it. That's typically somebody that kind of shows your propensity for just finding rescues and just making a bird dog out of kind of a question mark background without pedigrees or paperwork. I find it interesting that you're so involved with the breed club.
Well, I was asked once again, this guy, Michael Shippa, who's a breeder and very involved with Griffs. And there's another guy who's really the mastermind, Carol Kemp, who's a breeder out in California. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think like in 2010, there were 300 breeders of Griffs in the country. And now there's
1,500.
There's literally, it's like something like that.
Yeah. They exploded.
The gene pool's not huge to begin with, right? So the idea is that they want to make sure that the Griff still, or that we're trying to identify people who breed and we're trying to bring in people who want to own and hang around dogs that are actually field dogs. That's what they're bred for. They come from good field stock. They have good conformation. They're not, there's not, people aren't just breeding, oh, I've got a fuzzy dog and I've got a fuzzy dog and let's get them together. But, both of them have bad back ends or bad front ends or whatever. The function over form, right? It's like we want conformation is important, but we want to identify dogs that are good field dogs and that are Griffons. In other words, they're not, like you said, they're not English pointers, but they're not, but they do what a Griffon was designed to do. It's affiliated with the United Kennel Club, and also, because of that's a European, we're sort of have some sort of affiliation with the French breed. It's now considered a French dog, even though it's a German dog. So, but the main Griffon group is a French, which don't ask me to pronounce it. So we're trying to, we have an achievement rating system for the dog, which would be if you've tested your dog in UKC or, in AKC or in NAVDA or in VDHF, or you've run the dog in, different kinds of field trials, NASTRA or any of these field trials. If they have a certain level of attainment, and there's a whole formula, we'll rate your dog where it can have anywhere between 1 and 4 points, 4 being the maximum. That's the maximum individual dog can have. Now, if that dog has offspring and the offspring have offspring and they both achieve that level, they're 4 dogs as well, they'll get 6 or I think up to 8 points, because that's proven, the bloodlines have sort of proven themselves.
They've passed on.
Right. It's improved. We have a thing called the preservation breeder, which is breeders who, adhere to certain standards and test, hips and elbows and thyroid and eyes or whatever. And I'm not a breeder, so I don't know in particular, but to make sure that there's people that are breeding dogs that are quality dogs, and that they're going through the procedures that make that at least weigh the odds that you're going to get a dog that's a quality dog. Last year we held 2 field trials. This year we've got 4 planned. There's one coming up in February down in Arizona and Missouri in April. Then there's one in Michigan and one in Oregon earlier in the summer. They're UKC tests, so there's a TAN, which is it's a natural ability test of ability natural, I think is the French. There's a gun. You can either run the gun class, which is, it doesn't have to be steady to fall. I think it has to be steady to shot, but maybe it won't they won't ask you to pick your dog up if it's not steady to shot. You can run that as a solo or embrace. And then there's the open, which is the highest, which you want a completely finished dog, and that's steady to wing, shot, and fall. The neat thing, because I ran my dog, Ranger, who, by the fact that he ran in both field trials last year, was the only dog that did it, is now the highest ranked dog in our club. The nice thing about it is it's not like we put 12 birds out in the field and we want to see if they have one bird contact, and the test is the run is only 20 minutes. So if the dog shows that he's actively hunting, if the dog finds a bird and has, if the bird has one bird contact, that's all that's really needed. That's all they need to see. Usually there's an opportunity for 2 or 3 bird contacts, but not always, because, the birds go away. And the other thing they do that's interesting is they don't plant the birds in the same field. So I hosted one in Idaho where I used to live, on a big piece of national forest land. And we had, 500 acres. So the bird planters we'd drive the bird planters, a mile down the road, and they'd walk, and we sort of said, every 50 or 100 yards, throw a bird down. So the number 1 dog would go, and they'd run for 20 minutes, and then you'd kind of have them queued up. So when that dog got pulled over, you'd sort of were on the side, and the judge would wave their hat, and another dog would come in, but it'd be a completely different field, where there wouldn't be any more, there wouldn't be scent of the other dog, there wouldn't be scent of the other hunters. It's a continuously run thing, which is kind of it's kind of cool, as opposed to like you run in a AKC field trial, and it's the same field for every brace.
Yeah, and
it just gets crowded.
Yeah, there's 50 birds in there by the end of it.
Right. So that's one of the interesting things about it. But it's like any breed club trying to ensure that the Griffon stays true to Edward Corthal's vision or how it's interpreted, 150 years later, that we, if people want a good hunting dog and they want a Griffon, we're going to try to identify the places where you can go and get them. Also, with the field trials, you can have your dog confirmed. So we had last year in Idaho, we had Eileen Tremblay came in from Quebec, north of Quebec City. And, it's not a dog show. She had a piece of plywood on the ground and the dog stood on that. And, she took some measurements and looked at their teeth and looked at their coat and graded them. So it's not like they don't have to prance around, but it's just, does the dog set up? Is he built like a Griffon's supposed to be built?
Yeah.
Which is the same with any dogs. Do they have good angulation in the back? Is their front end assembled properly? Do they have, good tight feet? That sort of thing. Is the coat appropriate? Which is always hard in wire-haired dogs.
Proper height and all that stuff. That's really interesting. I can't say, I'm sure that they're out there, but I appreciate the scoring system to, it's like just at first glance, going up to 4, it's, you get different points by participating in different things. You guys aren't saying we only care about NAVDO or we only care about AKC or we only care about NASTRAs. It's kind of like, hey, you have a whole bunch of different options to get your dog scored and get that grade if you want to call it that way. But that's kind of interesting. I kind of like that perspective. Yeah, and some of them there's a whole spreadsheet that's put together, but there's ifs and if or. So if your dog got if he got a prize one in the UT that like he doesn't and he didn't do so well in some other, if he's running multiple tests, we give you the best score. In other words, we're not averaging them out. If your dog is a prize one in the UT or got has assembled so many points to NASTRA or whatever. That's
interesting. And then obviously what we're looking for is years down the road is the good dogs produce good dogs. And that's where you get this, a 6-point dog. So if you've got 2 people that've got 2 6-point dogs and are going to have a litter together, hopefully the odds are stacked in your favor that what's going to be produced out of that litter is going to be of the highest quality. Yeah.
Well, and like you just said, the number of Griffs have kind of exploded over the past handful of years and the number of breeders. So I have quite a few Griff owners that listen to this podcast regularly. So if they're listening to this and they're interested, kind of tell everybody where they can find you and find the trials and the dates and stuff like that. Of course, I'll have the link to the website and everything down in the show notes.
We have a website because we're poor, but we do have a Facebook page, which is Corthal Griffon United States. It's on Facebook. There's links in there to become a member, which is members $60 a year. You don't get anything for that except to say you're a member. We don't have a T-shirt. And then there's also forms for the field trials, which are, they're 2-day events. So usually, and it's a competition. So usually people run them and they do, they'll do both days because you want to accumulate points. Because, if you're interested in that, you want to accumulate points. So at the end of the year, we can identify your dog has got did the best in the open class and is the open class champion. And there's ribbons and whatnot. Oh, I also forgot to tell you, it's not the papers haven't been signed, but in 2025, we're going to have like a national championship at the Ames Plantation, which is kind of exciting.
Yep. That's my home state. I was going to say backyard, but Tennessee's a wide state, so it's still a handful of hours away. But,
are you in Eastern Tennessee?
I'm sorry?
Are you in Eastern Tennessee?
Middle. Right smack dab in the middle. So not too far, but it's doable for sure. But
is that near Memphis? Isn't that Ames Plantation? Is it near?
Yeah, it's kind of like, in between Memphis and Jackson almost. So, I think I looked at it the other day because I still got to make it by the Hall of Fame at some point. I still haven't been there in person. I looked at it. I want to say it's like a 4-hour drive from me. So not horrible, but not close either.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ken, as we wrap this up and start coming in for a landing, I've started asking everybody the same question as we wrap these up. What's a question that I should have asked you that I didn't?
Well, one of the things, because one of my favorite things is listening to the profiles of, the profile people. And I love the question, like, what's the one mistake that you've made? And I'm always like, damn, the one mistake? How about the top 100 mistakes I've made? I mean, I always think about, I'm like, is there really one mistake? And the thing I've thought about it is every mistake I've made, I think can be summed up in patience or lack of patience. Trying to do too much at once, trying to do things too fast, trying to, cram for something. And it usually turns around and comes and bites you in the ass if you do it. So, if I had anything to say, just like slow down, take your time, especially with puppies. I spend a lot of time helping people with puppies, and they, it's unbelievable how they when am I going to start doing whoa with this dog? Your dog's 18 weeks old, man. I mean, whoa on birds. If you want to whoa it to get into for food or whatever, that's fine. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but like formal training around birds,
don't be in a rush.
Don't be in a rush. You don't go to graduate school before you get out of grade school, and that's formal training is like the dog should have an idea of what's going on before you start, making it do stuff. So patience is the our lack of patience is my biggest error. And I think you see it with, I see it with other people too.
Yeah. I love it. Good, sound, practical advice, patience, just understanding, not being in a huge rush. I don't think anybody can argue with that sound advice.
So, I mean, but that's that's the one thing that question always triggers me. Man, have I made 1,000 mistakes? I'm trying to think. Probably.
We all have, and that's why I like asking the question. Is like whatever comes to your mind first is usually the correct answer. I tell everybody, like, you're not going to think of a little small just mistimed error. When you think of worst mistake, usually it's if it's not the first one that pops up into your mind, it's one of the first ones.
Yeah.
So. Man, Ken, I appreciate it. Everybody else, thank you for joining us as always. Hope you enjoyed this episode presented by Standing Stone Supply, Onyx Hunt, Final Rise, and Upland Gun Company. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can catch the next episode. Ken, I appreciate your time today.
Not a problem, Nick. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Bye.